Getting along in life depends a lot on knowing what's happening and knowing it correctly. Knowing where you are, what your circumstances are, what your own capabilities are. And we're all aware that we make mistakes. You might say even, or perhaps especially, mistakes about ourselves. In terms of what our capabilities are. Honest people over a lifetime change their minds lots of times. If you're fortunate enough to have good study partners, you change your mind every day, sometimes several times a day. So if you know that having a correct view of what's going on is very important, and you know that yourself, you make mistakes about things, one strategy to improve your position is to get input from sources that you can trust, so that you're not depending only on your own experience and your own knowledge, your own analysis. And that's why it's a very good counsel, even a counsel of reason, to largely rely on experts, though there are certain qualifications as to how you rely on experts. But typically, when you know there are people who understand the subject much better than you do, you seek their counsel in dealing with instances of that subject when you have to understand the world and make a decision. The absolutely reliable source of information about the world is the Torah. It is the Creator's communication to us as to what world we're living in and how to deal with it. Of course, it would require understanding what the Torah says. It requires careful study to understand what the Torah says. But when the Torah says something, that's something which isn't subject to limited perspective or prejudice or cultural programming. That's something which will be absolutely correct. So when you're confronted with a situation and you want to know what to do with it, it would be wonderful to be able to know how that situation looks from Hashem's point of view. How does He look at it? I think learning to ask the question is a good starting point for being able to access this dimension. Once you learn to ask the question, you find often that you don't really know how to look at it and how Hashem looks at it, and then you could be motivated to ask people who know more and could share with you a better understanding. I want to give you some examples of life circumstances which can seem to have a certain character, naturally intuitive and kind of feels natural that that's the way to look at it, and then to see that from a Kodesh Baruch Hu's point of view, it looks very different. Some examples of these particular cases themselves, and also to understand why one has a necessity to try to seek this out. This is a fable that I concocted. Let's suppose that I've decided to work on my hospitality. And I've decided that Friday nights, in the synagogue, shul, I see somebody who is not part of the local population, I'll offer hospitality. So here it is, Friday night, and the Chazan says, Baruch Hu, we start davening, and there he is, in the corner. Yeah. Definitely he's not one of us. Definitely he's a stranger. He's my target. There he is. Sooner the davening's over, I'm going to go over and offer him hospitality. So, we come to the end of Adon Olam, I get up out of my seat, and I turn to walk to the corner. I start walking to the corner, but Ruvain is 2 steps ahead of me. Where's Ruvain going, I wonder? Couldn't be that Ruvain's going to the stranger. He's taking the stranger, and he's offering him hospitality. And the stranger is nodding his head with a big smile, and they walk off together, and I lost my target. I lost my mitzvah. I feel terrible. Now, I think it's natural. You can understand that happening, planning to do something that would be very valuable and then having it lost at the last minute. But let's ask, how does it look to a Kodesh Baruch Hu? Well, the stranger got hospitality. And Reuven got a mitzvah, and I got a mitzvah too, because anyone who wants to do a mitzvah, decides to do it, and is prevented by third circumstance beyond his control, in a certain respect, also gets credit for the mitzvah. From a Kodesh Baruch Hu's point of view, it's win-win-win, and I'm upset. Well, maybe I should think about how I feel and work on it. Why shouldn't I try to look at it from a Kodesh Baruch Hu's point of view and say it was a win-win-win situation? You can be ego invested in your own service of Hashem, and that could be a shortcoming. Because, for example, you won't have room to allow somebody else to express his service of Hashem. So even though the subject is holy, but my attitude towards the subject wasn't an appropriate attitude. I should have been looking at it from a Kodesh Baruch Hu's point of view. Here's another example. This actually happened. In the early days, when I was here 43 years ago, one of the students came in and said to me, Rabbi, I just had a phenomenal experience. I was going to go to town. The bus stop was right outside the door. It was those days. I still have it over there. And I walked out to get to the bus, and just as I got to the bus pulled away. I just missed the bus. A clear sign from the Creator that I shouldn't go to town. How's that? Whew. I thought to myself, how am I going to break this to him? How do you know it was a sign from God that you shouldn't go to town? Maybe it was a sign from God that there's somebody on the next bus you had to meet. How did you read the sign? Who told you what it meant? When you interpret what's going on, and often we have a kind of natural, intuitive interpretation, but it could be dead wrong. And if you stop and think about it with a little caution, use your imagination, you could think up all sorts of other interpretations, and you realize you don't know which one is correct. Here's another example. Suppose someone says, you know, Rabbi, I found out that I had an uncle who I didn't know existed, and he died, and he left a large sum of money to me. And he died on Shavuos. Shavuos is the anniversary of receiving the Torah at Sinai. Clearly, I meant to take that money and go to yeshiva and learn Torah. Now, as strange as it may sound, I disagree with that conclusion. Because, as far as I know, there's no source whatsoever which says the date of decease is the symptom or the sign of what you're supposed to do with the inheritance. There's just no connection there whatsoever. So it's just made up to think that that's what a Kodesh Baruch Hu wants. Now contrast that with a person who's, let's say he's married, he's got 3 kids, and he's working and supporting them, and there's no other source of money, and he feels that his Torah education is inadequate. And he's spoken to a Rav about this. He says, yes, true, you really do need to have more Torah education. He says to the Rav, I'm supporting my family. And the Rav says, okay, that's your first priority. You have to support your family. And he gets that inheritance. And he says the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants me to go and learn in yeshiva. That's fine. Because he decided that he needed the learning in yeshiva before the inheritance came. That he decided on Torah grounds. That for sure Kodesh Baruch Hu would want him to do. But then, when the means present themselves, he's able to say that that's what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants him to do. So these are people now who are trying to look at it from a Kodesh Baruch Hu's point of view, but they're sometimes very naive about it, and they're sometimes going to make mistakes and draw conclusions that aren't warranted. So these are some, yeah.
Can I share a quick story of like how this aspect has happened in my life, like 1 minute?
Sure.
So moving to Israel, I was in Chicago before I was in Israel, and I tried getting an apartment, staying there in the area, and it just never worked out. Like I spent hours and hours looking and going to apartments. I checked out like 50 apartments, like nothing just worked out, you know? And then suddenly my uncle brought up the idea of coming to Israel. And then I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting. And then everything just flowed, like instantly. I'm like, book a ticket, boom, I got a ticket for free. Like there's a lot of crazy things that happened, and like, boom, you know, now I'm in Israel. And like it flowed super easily. So maybe that's another way.
That's very easy. You could say that your failure to find an apartment over so many tribes was to make you open to the alternative. If you had gotten an apartment just where you wanted, with a good rent, and you had settled yourself in, it would be much harder to make the decision. Yes, we do find that. We absolutely do find that. And then you see, this teaches us something else also, something that looks negative could really be positive. So you learn a little caution. You learn to step back from what's going on and not to draw certain conclusions. Maimonides' commentary in the Mishnah, he says this just as well. So now I'd like to share with you some ideas which we have in the Torah, which I think people's natural intuition goes one way, but the Torah's point of view has something very unintuitive to teach, which means you have to work on your intuitions. Mitzvahs can be divided. Now, I've said this before. I still tell you there are at least 163 different ways of dividing mitzvahs. So if I say they're divided to A and B, that's not the only way. It's not the most important way. It's just one of the many ways in which mitzvahs can be divided for the purposes of discussion. One way they can be divided is this. In some cases, a mitzvah is a commandment, meaning, because Baruch Hu says, I command you to do this. If you do it, you'll be rewarded. And if you fail to do it, you'll be punished. That's a commandment. Other mitzvahs are, I would call them invitations. Because Baruch Hu says, listen, here's this mitzvah. If you do it, you'll be rewarded. But if you omit it, I don't mind. No penalty. One is called mitzvah v'osa, commanded and does. And the other is called any mitzvah v'osa. He's not commanded, but he does it anyway. Now, it's not just random, because Baruch Hu lays this out as a mitzvah. But he says, this mitzvah, you're not required to do. It's just available, and so that if you do it, you will have a certain reward for doing it. Now, intuitively, which of these two categories would you think is the more precious, the more important, the more valid, the more noble, the more dedicated, deserving of higher regard and higher credit and higher reward? The ones where you are commanded, where you, so to speak, must do it, reward for performance and punishment for failure, or the ones which are voluntary, where if you do it voluntarily, you get rewarded for it, but if you don't do it, then you don't suffer any penalty. Which one would be the more important, the commanded or the voluntary? How many would think would be the commanded? How many would think would be the voluntary? Oh, it's like 4 and 3. Okay. Let's hear those who think that it would be the voluntary ones. Why would the voluntary ones be the more important ones? Yeah.
Because there's no negative aspect. So you don't have to be doing it. And so when you have to be doing it, there's no choice, and the only choice is to receive a punishment if you don't do it. But in the voluntary way, there's no punishment at all, and just doing it is out of pure desire and pure love for Hashem, and so therefore it should be rewarded on a higher level.
Okay. You taking the other point of view?
Yeah, if I can counter that,
Yeah.
I think that it's exactly the opposite. Because you do get punishment, you would absolutely, it's kind of like extra credit on a test. Like, it's great if you get it, but at the end of the day, what you're really focused on is the questions that if you get wrong are really going to have a negative effect in your life. So it's, on a logical perspective, better for you to focus on the things that you must do so that you don't incur the reward. And then if you tackle all of those things, then you can go into an extra credit mode.
Interesting. Okay. Now let's try the exercise that I'm talking about. Try looking at it from Kodesh Baruch Hu and tell me which of the two categories is more important to him.
It's the same thing. He wouldn't punish you if he didn't really want you to do it.
Think about it from the point of view of the commander. If he says, I command you to do this, if you don't, you're going to catch it, it must be he's really committed to getting that done. If he says, I'm inviting you, and if you do it, it'll be nice. Like you say, extra credit. Thank you very much. If you do it, it'll be nice. But if not, I don't mind if you omit it. How committed is he to getting it done? Not very, because he's giving you the option of not doing it. And then, if it's more important to him, we should try to adopt his point of view and see that should be more important to us. Now, that's step one. The second step is to try to explain the answer to your question. You pointed out a certain aspect in which the voluntary mitzvah seems to be superior. The Torah is telling me the overall position is that it's inferior. We have to stop and think, what do I learn from that? I want to just take one moment to give in here a philosophical footnote. There's a difference between proving something and explaining something. A lot of science is dedicated to explaining things that we know are true. They've been proved, which is to know why they happen that way, like the phenomena in quantum mechanics, which no one explains. You can predict in statistical terms what's going to happen, but why it happens that way, what makes it happen that way, no one has a clue. And until, let's say, the early 20th century, no one knew why the stars shine. No one had a clue why the stars shine. Could anybody have dreamt 200 years ago of nuclear fusion? I don't think so. They didn't even have molecules, let alone atoms and particles. Right? The stars definitely shine. It's just we don't know why they shine. So there's a big difference between a proof and an explanation. I'll give you a final example. This you could actually do, maybe when we parents do it with kids. You can prove that hot air rises and cold air sinks. And here's how you do it. Let's say it's wintertime and you have your door to the outside. So you open the door a crack, and then you take a candle, a lit candle. If you hold the candle at the bottom of the crack, you'll see that the flame points into the room. If you hold the top of the crack, you'll see that the flame points out of the room. Why is that? Because at the crack, you have contact between the warm air in the room and the cold air outside. What happens when the warm air and the cold air meet? The cold air goes down and comes in underneath, and the hot air goes up and goes out above. So when you put the candle at the bottom, the flame points in because the cold air from outside is coming in. When you put it at the top of the crack, the warm air from inside is going out and the flame points out. You have proved that the hot air rises and the cold air sinks. You proved that. Why does that happen? Why? I don't know. I mean, like you wouldn't have a clue. We know that air is made of particles, and we know the denser the particles, the colder it is, and because the heat spreads them out, the warmer it is, the more spread out they are. So this weighs more, this weighs less, and that's why it goes that way. But that wasn't known until the 20th century. Everybody knew which one goes up, which goes down for thousands of years. Nobody knew why. So when we have a proof, and the Torah tells us, obligatory commandments that are, if you do it, you get a reward. If you don't, you get punished, are more important than those that are voluntary. So that's a proof. Now we know what the truth is. But we don't yet have an explanation as to why that's so. What about it is so? So now, again, so we proved it by asking, what's more important to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And obviously, if he commands it, he really wants it done. And if he offers it as an invitation, he's not as committed to having it done. So it's obviously more important to him. But why? Where do we see the importance of it? Especially since, I'll just elaborate a little bit on what you said. If you're told you get rewarded for doing it and punished for not doing it, so in a certain sense, your freedom of choice is very severely limited. Surely when you have, it's an invitation, and it's up to you to omit it if you want, then you have a much broader field of choice that you can make. So your boundaries on what you can choose are much narrower when you are given an obligatory commandment. But think of what that means for your own experience of it. Think of what it means for your own spiritual expression in it. Ask yourself, from your point of view, in which of these two types of mitzvos is there more of Hashem in the performance? And in which of the two is there more of you in the performance? Let's think of what you said about the voluntary. The voluntary shows my desire, my love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my commitment, my dedication. Because one could have said it shows my nobility, that I appreciate this noble opportunity. The one word that appeared 5 times in the last sentence I spoke was my. My desire, my love, my appreciation, my value, my, Sounds like there's an awful lot of me there. It's important because it expresses who I am. It expresses my best side. It expresses my good character, my good ideals. Definitely does. There's an awful lot of me there. When it comes to the other one, we say, well, Kodesh Baruch Hu is imposing on this on me, and I accept his imposing it upon me. There's much more of a Kodesh Baruch Hu in the picture, much less of me in the picture. It's much more about him than it is about me. And maybe, for my own spirituality, the goal is to project as much of a Kodesh Baruch Hu into me as possible. Not to show how much I'm dedicated to him, but to project him into me. An obligatory commandment does that much more so than a voluntary commandment does that. What I'm telling you now is really a Ritva and a Maharal. And the Ritva goes so far as to say, to take your point and say, listen, the obligatory is really more central. It's really more of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, what you're doing. But if you do it voluntarily, you're also rewarded. You're also considered to be doing so. Also. You also get in. Through the back door, but you get in. We're not ignoring you. It talks about being a chassid. Because, you're doing the right thing. Even though there's an awful lot of you in the performance, of a lot of focus on who you are and what you're doing and your significance in the performance. But still, you'll get something. Don't worry. It's not completely eliminated, but it's definitely secondary. So the very item which led to the intuition that it must be more important because it's my desire and my love and my appreciation of it and so on, that becomes the thing that you want to supersede, not the thing that you want to put in the centrality of your self-conception and your performance of mitzvot. Yeah.
So within voluntary mitzvot, though, there's a couple things when it comes to abstinence. There are things that are permissible for a person to spend their time doing, watching a basketball game, something like that. A person chooses to abstain from watching that because he wants to learn more Torah. So first off, is there a commandment that really you should be learning Torah always? And then also, like if a person's trying to be pious because he is trying to emulate Hashem, and he's trying to be, I'm going to try to be more and more and more and more like Hashem, as we're learning the Torah, isn't that also for Hashem, not you?
Okay, so both remarks are accurate, and they have to be put in the appropriate framework. Let me speak of the first one because that's really very, very central. Is there a rule that you should spend all of your time learning? Sort of. I mean, you could also take time to breathe. Would be advisable to take time to eat from time to time because, after all, if you don't eat, you can't learn. How about sleeping? I have met people over my lifetime who regret having to sleep. What a gigantic spiritual loss that is. Now, if you take that really seriously, then what you're really saying is, gee, God, you really flubbed it. You made us something to sleep, and we lose all that time. Could have done a better job. Make it so we don't need sleep. Probably that's not an appropriate critique. Probably God had something in mind when He made us subject to sleep. Probably He had something in mind that we should do with respect to that. That's 100%. That's 100% right. So the rule is you should be learning all the time that you're not doing other mitzvos or doing something that is necessary to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu altogether. And that last category has a lot of entries. Yeah, you need food and drink, and you need to rest, and you need shelter, and you need perhaps medical attention, all the rest of that. But you also need to have things that give you a psychological health, a psychologically positive attitude towards the world, self-confidence, and a certain amount of joy and happiness. And even the great Musar books, Musar meaning self-discipline and self-control and spiritual focus and so forth and so on, do stress this. Now, I'll quote one. This is a quote from a book which I would say is less quoted than other passages in the book, to put it lightly. In the first chapter of the Mesilas Yesharim, the Path of the Just, he says the following: everyone needs a certain amount of physical pleasure. Physical pleasure. Why? Why do you need physical pleasure? Because physical pleasure gives you two things. Number one, it gives you nachas ruach. Nachas ruach is a very hard thing to translate into English. Nachas is a kind of satisfaction and pleasure. A kind of things are okayness. Things are good. And ruach means your spirit. Your spirit should feel things are good. Says the Mesilas Yesharim, physical pleasure brings that. Physical pleasure. A good meal, a good sleep, a walk, an energetic walk after which you feel energized. And you should have some physical pleasure to have that psychological condition of nachas ruach. That's one. And the other is Yeshivat Ohr. Yeshivat Ohr means my mind isn't agitated. I can focus my mind. I don't have to force it to be focused. It's naturally focusable, so that I can choose something to think about it, and then I think about it. And when I'm thinking about it, nothing disturbs me and distracts me. Physical pleasure brings that about. There's a certain sense of everything's okay, and since everything's okay, so then I don't have to worry. I don't have to, I have responsibilities. I'll get to them 2 hours from now. And when you come into Shabbos, you're really not supposed to think about jobs that you have left to do. It says 6 days you should do all your work. So the commentators say, all your work? Really? Listen, I have some long-term projects. I can't finish them in 6 days. They're going to go on for months. So the commentators say, when you come into Shabbos, it should be as if all your work is done. Oh, man, that's, that doesn't sound easy. And I remember when I was becoming Sabbath observant, I was in university, and I thought, what's going to happen during the exam week? Comes to that Shabbos. Am I going to study for the exams or not? And it's tricky. It's not obviously forbidden, although it isn't the best, and so forth and so on. And I myself hadn't made up my mind. Well, it came Friday night, and we made Kiddush, and we had a meal, and we were singing. Shabbos morning, and then went to the synagogue, and we prayed. We had another meal, then a rest in the afternoon. And before I knew it, the whole Shabbos was over, and it didn't even occur to me to study. I thought, wow, that's already something very valuable. I didn't have to make the decision. Just, I was on another plane, I was in another dimension, and it didn't come up. So that sense of things being right can be created by physical pleasure. And the Mesilas Yesharim says a person needs the physical pleasure which will bring him to that psychological state. So, to go back to the rule we're talking about. Yes, there's a mitzvah to learn Torah all the time, except when you're doing other mitzvos, and when you're doing things that are necessary to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the best possible way, which will include some physical pleasure, so as to have the nachas ruach and Yeshivat Ohr, the pleasant satisfactoriness of life, and the unagitated mental focus, so as to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the best possible way. So, of course, then judgments have to be made about which, how much and when and where, but these are things that are necessary. These are not voluntary. Now, you go to the basketball game, the way to gauge that is, what will be the consequences of not going? You're going in order to have a sense of pleasantness about your life in the world and the ability to focus your mind. And if you don't go, and you're going to be agitated and restless and so forth and so on. If you do go, you're going to come back with a sense of satisfaction and be able to calmly, in a focused way, do the mitzvahs that you have to do. Then it might be the right thing to go to the basketball game. And then, if those are then it'd be not only the right thing, but you should go, because you're producing for yourself a condition under which you'll do mitzvahs in the best possible way. So that's one thing. And so the idea, by the way, which comes out of this is service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is 24/7, 365. There's no time off from serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's just that going to a basketball game might also be part of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To have a very broad-minded picture of how that goes. That was only one half of the question, but let's go. I'll go on somebody else and I'll come back to you for time. Yeah.
please tell me if this is nitpicky or overthinking, but when we talk about something you're obligated to do, you're still doing it whether it's like out of awareness of Shemayim or love of Hashem, no? Because you know that the thing that you don't want to do, that you're obligated, let's say you don't want to, let's say you really want to give your wife a hug, but you're right in the middle of Nida, right? Like you keep yourself away because you know Hashem wants it.
That's right.
But at the same time, you're doing it, there's no like altruistic act, right? Like the person's doing it not just because Hashem wants it, it's because they know there's a consequence and they know there's a reward, right?
Well, that might or might not be true. It all depends. I've used the idea of reward and punishment to signify HaKadosh Baruch Hu's investment in the action. From his investment in the action, I can determine which one he cares about most. Doesn't follow yet that should be my motivation. So here we have like a two-track idea. Someone who serves the HaKadosh Baruch Hu just to get reward and avoid punishment, his service is valid. And he will be rewarded. And he will not be punished. After all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up a system of rewards and punishments. He didn't set it up just in order to turn your back on it and pretend it isn't there. But there are higher motivations for doing it. And the progress towards higher motivation has like two dimensions. One dimension is you should add a higher dimension to express a higher spiritual understanding. And eventually, you can grow to the point where you leave behind the lower motivation. So one step up is the idea of Kodesh Baruch Hu represents the ultimate in value, the ultimate in goodness, the ultimate in greatness. He's running the whole world. How could I not do what he wants done? It's more important than anything else could be. I would feel embarrassed at myself if I didn't do that. Now, I gave you the example the other day of Walter Reed. Right? His was an expression of that idea. I can save thousands of lives. Yeah, I'll put myself in danger, but how can I not save those thousands of lives? How can I not do that? No one else can do it. I know where it comes from. Nobody else is convinced. If I convince other people, I could save thousands of lives. The greatness of the obligation becomes the motivation. So it's not because of reward and punishment. It doesn't have to be. It can be out of the sense of the enormity of the consequences of what I'm doing.
Are you saying that we have to get to a higher level for it to be closer to altruism? Because I was told to hesitate from that kind of thinking, because if we all think like, oh, only the tzaddik is at that level. So
listen, you're right. Listen to what I said again, because I really answered that, but I said it, but I didn't say it out. I said, if you're on the totally selfish level, where you do it to get reward and avoid punishment, you will get reward and avoid punishment. So it doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't worthwhile, because Baruch Hu will validate it by giving you the reward for what you did. So it's definitely valid. But there are higher levels of motivation. And I said the first step would be to add a higher motivation. So now you'll have two. You'll be going for reward and avoiding punishment. And also, you don't want to violate something that's so overwhelmingly important. And then the third stage would be to outgrow the selfish, as you're right, and you're quite right to call it selfish. I'm in it for myself. And to become in it for the fact that it represents what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, and he's more important than I am. And then the thing goes a step beyond that, which is doing it out of love. There are gradations in motivation. But that doesn't mean that you simply throw away the bottom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to start with the bottom. That's why he set it up that way. Indeed, as my oldest son pointed out, he ran a school for a number of years. If you look at the way the Rambam talks about teaching Torah, motivating children to learn Torah, little children you motivate with candy and nuts and things that they like to eat, and older children you motivate with clothes or trips, and older, as they grow older, you motivate them with promises of honor and respect. You'll be a scholar, people will think of you as highly, and so forth and so on, until the child's, and now young adult's mind matures to the point where he can transcend those things and come to appreciate something as great as serving and being related to the creator of the universe, than which there is nothing greater possible. But it's a gradual process. And when he's 13 and he's in the middle of the process, It doesn't mean that the Kodesh Baruch Hu rejects him and turns his back on him. No, he's developing, and this is the way in which he has to develop. Okay, now I didn't answer the second part of your question.
I think I could see Rabbi's model for answering it. But
What was it? What was the second half? I don't know.
that a person could continue working on himself, refining every part of his intention in his life in order to emulate Hashem.
So this is a lifelong project, and it's a piecemeal project, and it doesn't have to be done by 10 o'clock next Thursday. It's unending, because as you master certain level of understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and relating to Him, that opens up a new vista. It's like climbing foothills before you get to the mountain. And when you're climbing the foothill, all you can see is the top of the foothill. When you get to the top of the foothill, you see the next foothill. So then you go down the valley and you climb the next one. So it's an unending process of new revelations and new challenges. And the circumstances shift and the challenges change. The Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mizrich, both of them on their deathbeds, were heard saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please save me from pride. Save me from pride. And you can imagine living the lives that they lived. Earth-shattering lives, historic lives. You know, when the Mashiach comes, and it's Tchias HaMesim, they'll definitely be in the front row. So having lived such spectacular lives and definitely fought spiritual battles and all the rest, the final temptation would be, I'm about to leave the world. Yeah, I did a good job. And then the Satan is laughing. Got you in the end. Got you in the end. You think you did a good job, right? You're taking credit for it yourself. Down! You're down! So that was their last prayer. Please don't let me be conquered by pride. So that's something which only if you did a really good job and at the last moments, that challenge will be before you then, and won't be before you before. So there'll be different challenges as you go through life. There's another deeper aspect here also. People ask, we read about the miracles that took place in prior generations, especially in Egypt and coming out of Egypt and in the wilderness, and even later. Why is it that they had those open miracles and we don't have such open miracles? There's a lot to say about this, but in terms of what we're talking about now, each generation, each person of the generation, each person in different periods of his life has different challenges because there are different things to be accomplished. So the circumstances that you're under are a definition of the project that you're assigned to. I think I mentioned this before, but it's very relevant here. The people who left Egypt and spent 40 years in the wilderness, there was no challenge to overcome the drive for atheism. Atheism was just dumb. Every 6-year-old know there was a God who was giving them a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud and food on the ground in the mornings, except for Shabbos and holidays and so on and so on. You know, and the ground swallows Korach. They saw that going on all the time. Atheism wasn't an option. Okay, so that struggle against the temptation to atheism wasn't their struggle. It wasn't their struggle. That doesn't mean they're less than us or more than us. That was the struggle that God put in front of them. In a certain way, they say that when they went into the land of Israel and all the miracles stopped, that became an entirely different type of test. And in a way, there's a certain greatness to that test that they didn't have in the wilderness. Each one has its own. So that's true of yours in terms of your life and the lives of the nation. If you're really, really concerned about whether we have miracles that we can point to, I think there's one that we can, and that's the survival of the Jewish people. I wrote about that in my book. And you can read why I think that there are no plausible natural explanations for it. And Baruch Hashem, the book is being reprinted. It's just started now. In a few weeks it should be out. And I'll have copies available. Yeah.
I also just kind of think that while some of Hashem's miracles obviously don't reflect that of splitting a sea or giving us the cloud that provides everything for us, I definitely think that if we seek out, things in the modern age that have happened, I think it can be even pretty clear that Hashem was involved. I think most notably, one of those examples was from the Iranian missile attack. I mean, with 300 bus-sized IBMs that could have laid waste the whole city, and yet not a single Jew was hurt.
It is astonishing. It is astonishing. And
It's a
we
miracle.
were here during the Iraq War, and then I remember during the war I spent some time in London. I was reading the London Times, and they said the Iraqis have received shipments of gas, poison gas from Germany. Poison gas from Germany. How about that? And here's the missile, and here's the warhead. Here's how it can carry it, and this, right? And as I remember, it was something like 39 missiles were launched at Israel. They didn't have Kipat Barzel, to shoot them down. And only one person was killed, and there wasn't any gas. And that person was himself, made it public that he was off the track in certain ways. And we said then also, 39 missiles, but no way to stop them, and nobody got, only one person got hurt, and he was a person with problems. So you see these, and this last one is the one that you talked about. I saw an article by someone who works in the defense industry. He's an engineer, and he's a top scientist, and he said, I work on these systems, I build these systems. And these systems, each one has, at best, a 90% reliability. And we're using 5 systems at the same time. The idea that 5 systems that you need all at the same time, each one has a 10% failure rate, and you don't have some spectacular failures, it's just not right. It just can't happen. I know how these systems work. To see here that there wasn't, they were all shot down. It was like, or fell in empty areas. I said, you've got to see that as something, as something wrong. So yes, I think you're right. And I think also in your private life, I hear there's a psychological tendency, oh, well, coincidences happen. If you push that to the end, there's no science. Yeah, all the beakers turn green. But coincidences happen. Who says it's a law? Who says it's a rule? These things happen. If you have that attitude, you can't learn anything. Sometimes you have to say, well, something's going on here. I had one incident happen to me a number of years ago. This was when 9/11 took place, that I was scheduled to speak in the United States. I went to America. Across the Atlantic, I took a Virgin Atlantic flight, and it was supposed to come back from JFK. And it was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm the kind of guy who gets there at 6 in the morning because who knows what could happen. And it was fall already in America. It was dark. I get there in a taxi, and I get out of the taxi, take my bags, look around. Nobody there. Not only nobody there, but the whole section's dark. Doors are locked. I think, wow, what's going on? I don't know what to do. 5 minutes later, a car pulls up. Young man is driving. There's a young woman in the back seat. And he says, are you here for the Virgin flight to England? I said, yeah. He said, well, it's been moved to Newark. Oh, moved to Newark. Yeah, he said, and I'm going there. Would you like a ride? This is 6:30 in the morning at a deserted JFK, right? So I said, would I like a ride? Yes. And it was a very small car, so I was sitting with my knees under my chin. He wouldn't even let me pay for the tolls. So I said to him, why did you come to JFK? He said, well, I live in the 5 towns, isn't far, and I thought I'd just come and take a look. That's not normal. Excuse me, that's not normal. He's driving his cousin to the flight, and he's happy to come and take a look. And there I am. I don't think you should dismiss that. I don't think you should just ignore that. Yeah, coincidences happen. Right. So do atoms disintegrate. So nothing like that happens. I would take your attitude. Don't give it away. Don't push it away. Be thankful for it. Tell it over to other people. It's a mitzvah to be mefarsim this and to publicize miracles that happen, so that other people will be more aware and be more sensitive and not just dismiss these things as we are trained to, because we want to avoid the implications. Yeah.
You spoke earlier too about when we try to see signs and they're not accurate. I missed the bus because I wasn't supposed to go to town. How do you know where to draw the line between these stories that do seem like they can't be, like your story here?
Yeah.
But then, that little doubt creeps in, and it's like, yeah, but I don't know what's going on in Hashem's mind, or this or that. Like,
I think you're right to be concerned about it, and I think you have to get to a point where you can trust your judgment to some extent. And how do you learn to trust your judgment? I'm going to reveal to you a secret of Jewish learning, which when you come to experience it, you'll find it very thrilling. If you're going through a text and you think, gee, what about Q? It seems to me that Q ought to be in here someplace. And as you go on, you see that one of the great commentators brings in Q. Then you say, yeah, I got it. And in our words, it's Baruch Shekivanti. Blessed is Hashem that I thought of what is really going on here because he said so. The opposite of the university, where you have to say something that's new. If you say something somebody else said, then you lost it because you can't publish it. No, here, if you say something somebody else, it happens to you over and over again, then you think, my mind is going down the right groove. You have an objective test that your mind is going down the right groove. And then when you make a judgment, you have some reason to trust it. Now, it will take a while before that starts to happen regularly, but it's a wonderful, wonderful confirmation that you really are achieving some understanding. When you're in a shir, and you ask a question, and the teacher says, Tosfos asks your question, that should make your day. That should make your week. You thought of a question that Tosfos asked. That's tremendous. That's how you get to the point where you have a little more sense of trust for the intuition that you have. Here, I went to give shiurim. I get to teach Jewish students, to talk to them, to try to influence them to become more religious, everything else. And Kadosh Baruch Hu gave me a gift on coming back. I don't think it was to trip me up. I don't think it was to stimulate my pride, so I would do things that are overly self-aggrandizing. I don't think that was the purpose of it. I think the purpose was to show me that he was there for me when I needed it to come back from that trip.